Now I'm ready to construct my notebook. I actually already have constructed it, but I'm going to walk you through each part. And I'm going to go slower for this particular report than we will in the future, because I'm going to help those of you who are new to R and R notebooks understand the various components. I talked about a number of the concepts that I'm going to refer back to in my R videos, but nonetheless, this is your first time looking at doing a report, so let's take our time in going through this. So I started a notebook, and the first thing I did was to change and add some information up here. Everything between those three dashed lines is our header. It's actually called a YAML, Y-A-M-L. I'm not going to get into what that means here. This is not my R course, but you can just think of it as the header. So I have my title in quotes, I have my author name in quotes, and I have my output is going to be an HTML notebook. And when you initiate a notebook, the default will be to give you a title and an HTML notebook. So all you have to do is add an author's name and tweak the title. Now, you don't have to use the here library. I talked about this in my Cool R Tools videos. But the here library is something that I always use because I like to have a folder structure. So let me show you that folder structure over here in my Files window. So this is my project folder. I can tell it's my project folder because my rproj file is right here. But notice that I have subfolders. I have one for data, one for R notebooks, one for the syllabus when I created the syllabus for this class. So under my R notebooks is where I have the notebook that we're working on right now, which is the EDRM 711 Instructor Model 1. But under data is where you'll see the hsb2.csv file that I created from the Excel file. If I wanted to, I could just put that CSV file in the same folder as this notebook and all would be well. So if you want to have a single project folder for your notebook and your data, that would work fine. I would recommend doing a different project for each assignment if you want to do it that way. I actually am using a single project for the entire 711 class, but that's because I'm putting things in notebooks to keep them, or in folders rather, in order to keep them organized. But you could, and I think that this is the most common thing your classmates do, is that they create a project for every assignment and then just put all the files in that project, in which case you do not need to use this here library. But the reason that I'm using the here library is because when I read in the data, here is the here function being used. This little piece right here that I've highlighted is the here function being used. This says look in the folder data and look for the file hsb2.csv. It will always start at the project root folder, which is this one. So therefore, data is off the project root, which is why I have data here. And then within data is the file I need. So I can be over here in another folder within my project and call on the data from the data folder. So again, you do not need this. All you would need is to have read.csv and then have hsb2.csv as long as it was in the same folder as the project folder and your notebook. So the read.csv is going to now read this data. I do have a header on the data, which is why I say header true. And because it's a CSV, everything's separated by commas. By the way, this header equals true and separate equals comma, those are the defaults for the function, so I really don't even need to put these in there. Little secret to give you a shortcut. If I wanted to, I could have done it just like that, and it would have assumed that there was a header and there was a comma. But I sometimes like to make it explicit, and that's what I'm doing here. Now, once I read in the data, I have to put it somewhere. And I'm putting it over here in what we call an object, and this object name is students. I can name this anything that I want. I could name it Bob, I could name it Mike, I could name it Mary Ellen, although not two words. I need to either put those together as one word or separate them with an underscore or something like that. So a single word, but I can name it anything I want. I usually try to pick a name that is indicative of what I have. In this case, I have students. I might have called it student data, would have been a fine name. Again, not as two words. I would have had to connect those with an underscore or period or something. So let's go ahead and finish this first little part here. Now this part all here between these three apostrophes and these three apostrophes, this is all a code chunk, which is where we write our script. So anything outside of the code chunk, like later on here, you see that I'm writing a description. That's our markdown where we actually write the text of our report. But anything within a code chunk, that is actually giving commands to R. So I've already given a command to read the CSV file. Now I'm going to have another function in which what I'm doing is I'm turning SES into a factor. Now notice that when I read this in, let me go ahead and read this in, and so that I can show you over here in the environment. When we read in to objects or create objects, they appear in our environment, meaning that they're now loaded into memory, ready for use. If I clicked on this little broom, it would eliminate everything from the environment, and now I've got to reload it. So I'm reloading it into the environment. If I click on this little arrow, it shows me that this students is a data set. In fact, it even tells me here there are 200 observations of 11 variables. Here are the 11 variables. So I have read in a data set into this students object, and that data set contains variables. When we want to access one of those variables, we have the name of the data set, a $sign, and then the name of the variable. So here to get to students SES, I'm using students $SES. And what I'm going to do is change that variable to a factor. That means a categorical variable. Right now, R thinks that this is a number. It thinks it's the numbers 1, 2, and 3. See where it says int? That means integer. It thinks that these are numbers, integers, 1, 2, and 3. I'm going to change that, and I'm going to say 1 ought to be called low. I'm giving this labels. 2 should be called middle, and 3 should be called high. Similarly here for race, I'm changing this into Hispanic, Asian, African American, and white. How did I know what order to use? That was in our data code book. It said Hispanic was 1, Asian 2, African American 3, and white was 4. So that's where I got that information. Notice I did all of this at the top of the script. I read in the variable, or the data. I read the data into students, and then I changed the two variables that I'm going to use that are categorical. We actually have more categorical variables in the data set, but we're not using them. So I changed the two that I'm going to use into factors to indicate that these are categorical variables. Now there's one other thing I did, and that is I clicked on this little gear icon, and I told R that when it runs this little code chunk, I want it to show the output, but not the code, show output only. And then R automatically put in echo equals false, which is the way it says we're going to show the output, but we're not going to echo the script. And that way, when I create my preview, which we'll do here in a moment, I won't see all this code. So let me show you that, but let's do that by first looking at my R Markdown here for my description. This report will study the relationship of socioeconomic status and reading test scores, so forth. You have access to this notebook, so I don't need to show all this. I do note that I put year unknown, and that's actually not true. This is the high school and beyond survey. I noticed when I was looking at the data that I actually did have the year. The high school and beyond survey conducted on high school seniors in 1980 by the National Center for Education Statistics. So I'm going to correct that. So here is the description. This is the source of data. I'm putting it in italics. How do I know that? Because I have an asterisk on each side. And if you've gotten yourself your little R Markdown cheat sheet, you'll know that you put an asterisk on each side in order to get italics. So let's go ahead and look at the first part of the report by clicking on this preview button. Before I do that, I'm going to run all the code so that it will generate the output that I'm wanting. Okay, so I'll click on preview. And notice that the code I had above the word description does not show because I told it not to show. Notice that because I put description as a header, let me show you that again. I used 3 hashtags. If I had used 2 hashtags, it'd been a bigger header, 1 hashtag, a real big header. I experimented until I got a size that I thought was appropriate relative to the text. Here's my source of data in italics. And now I'm ready to begin my analysis. So we'll do that in the next video.